the diplomatic history of the United States is a central thread in the nation's development, from its fight for independence to becoming a global superpower. America's foreign policy has evolved through ideological shifts, geopolitical realities, and global challenges. This narrative explores U.S. diplomacy chronologically, highlighting key events, policies, and figures that shaped America's role on the world stage. 1. Foundations of American diplomacy, 1776 to 1823, the Revolutionary Era, and Treaty of Paris, 1776 to 1783. American diplomacy began with the struggle for independence. The Continental Congress sent envoys to France, Spain, and the Netherlands seeking support against Britain. The most notable achievement was a Franco-American alliance, 1778, orchestrated by Benjamin Franklin, which provided military aid and recognition. The Treaty of Paris, 1783, negotiated by Franklin, John Jay, and John Adams, ended the war. It secured American independence and favorable borders, demonstrating early diplomatic success. Early Republican neutrality. President George Washington emphasized neutrality, fearing entanglement in European wars. His farewell address, 1796, warned against permanent alliances, shaping American diplomacy for over a century. The Jay Treaty, 1794, normalized relations with Britain post-war but was controversial. The Pinckney's Treaty, 1795, with Spain secured navigation rights on the Mississippi River. Louisiana Purchase and expansion. Under Thomas Jefferson, the Louisiana Purchase, 1803, doubled U.S. territory. Though a domestic decision, it had global implications, showing how diplomacy and expansion intertwined. 2. Diplomacy in a growing republic, 1823 to 1860. Monroe Doctrine, 1823. President James Monroe, advised by John Quincy Adams, issued the Monroe Doctrine, declaring the Western Hemisphere off-limits to European colonization. Though symbolic at first, it became a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy. Trade and the China opening. In the 1840s, the U.S. began looking westward. The Treaty of Wangia, 1844, with China opened trade and marked the beginning of America's Pacific engagement. Mexican-American War, 1846 to 1848. Driven by manifest destiny, the U.S. engaged in war with Mexico, resulting in the Treaty of Guadalupe. Hidalgo, through which the U.S. gained California and the Southwest. This aggressive diplomacy expanded U.S. territory dramatically. 3. Civil War and post-war diplomacy, 1861 to 1898. Civil War diplomacy. During the Civil War, the Union worked to prevent European recognition of the Confederacy. Key was the Trent Affair, 1861, where diplomacy helped avoid war with Britain. The Union emphasized its anti-slavery stance. After the Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, weakening Confederate support abroad. Seward's expansionism. William H. Seward, Lincoln's Secretary of State, envisioned American dominance in the Pacific. He orchestrated the purchase of Alaska, 1867, from Russia and sought influence in the Caribbean. Pan-Americanism and trade. In the late 19th century, the U.S. promoted Pan-Americanism to enhance hemispheric cooperation. It also opened Japan, Commodore Perry. 1853, forging economic ties with Asia. 4. Emergence as a world power, 1898 to 1918. Spanish-American War, 1898, triggered by the explosion of the USS Maine and fueled by expansionist fervor. The Spanish-American War resulted in the U.S. acquiring Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico. Cuba became a U.S. protectorate under the Platt Amendment. This war marked America's transition to an imperial power, sparking debates about the nation's global role. Theodore Roosevelt and big stick diplomacy. Roosevelt's foreign policy mantra was speak softly and carry a big stick. He oversaw the Panama Canals construction, invoked the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, justifying intervention in Latin America, and brokered peace in the Russo-Japanese War, 1905, for which he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Dollar diplomacy and moral diplomacy. President Taft employed dollar diplomacy, using economic power to influence Latin America and East Asia. His successor, Woodrow Wilson, introduced moral diplomacy, promoting democracy and peace, though he intervened in Mexico and the Caribbean. 5. World Wars and Isolationism, 1914 to 1945. World War I and Wilsonian idealism. Though neutral at first, the U.S. entered World War I in 1917, citing Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare and the Zimmermann telegram. Wilson's 14 points propose a new world order emphasizing self-determination, free trade, and a League of Nations. However, the Treaty of Versailles was never ratified by the U.S. Senate, and the U.S. returned to isolationism. Interwar diplomacy. The 1920s saw arms reduction efforts like the Washington Naval Conference, 1921 to 1922. The Kellogg-Briand Pact, 1928, outlawed war but lacked enforcement. The Good Neighbor policy under FDR sought to improve relations with Latin America, moving away from interventionism. World War II and the Grand Alliance. The U.S. entered World War II after Pearl Harbor, 1941. It joined the Allies and played a crucial role in victory. Key diplomatic moments include the Atlantic Charter, 1941, with Britain's Churchill promoting a post-war vision. Conferences like Yalta, 1945, and Potsdam, 1945, where the Allies shaped the post-war order. Founding membership in the United Nations, 1945. 6. Cold War diplomacy, 1945 to 1991. Origins of the Cold War. Post-war tensions with the Soviet Union escalated into the Cold War. The Truman Doctrine, 1947, pledged aid to nations resisting communism. The Marshall Plan, 1948, rebuilt Western Europe, while the Berlin Airlift, 1948 to 49, demonstrated resolve, containment, and alliances. George Kennan's containment strategy shaped U.S. policy. The U.S. led the formation of NATO, 1949, and intervened in Korea, 1950 to 1953, under the UN flag to counter North Korea's invasion, Cuban Missile Crisis, and arms control. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world close to nuclear war. Diplomacy by JFK and Khrushchev led to de-escalation. This event led to a series of arms control agreements. China visit, global power dynamics. Nixon and Brezhnev also signed the SALT-I Treaty, limiting nuclear weapons. Late Cold War and Reagan Doctrine. President Ronald Reagan revived a hardline stance against the USSR, but also engaged in summits with Mikhail Gorbachev. Key treaties included INF Treaty 1987, eliminating intermediate-range missiles. The Cold War ended peacefully with the collapse of the USSR, 1991, and the reunification of Germany. 7. Post-Cold War diplomacy, 1991 to 2001, unipolar moment. With the USSR's collapse, the U.S. became the world's sole superpower. The Gulf War, 1991, showcased American military and diplomatic leadership in expelling Iraq from Kuwait under a UN coalition. U.S. promoted globalization, free trade, e.g. NAFTA 1994, and expanded NATO eastward. Humanitarian interventions. 8. War on Terror and Global Challenges, 2001 to 2020.